All right, yeah, I was just saying that we're going to take you through just the three areas, a bit about the company and the product, the highlights of the last year, and our strategy moving forward. And I was just about to say that all the financial figures in this presentation are actually Australian dollars. So you discount by about 25% as you're watching these figures go through on the slideshow. So as you can see, we'll start with our mission statement, is to help the customers create a safe, secure and compliant workplace through innovative products that manage the access and presence of people. And essentially what that is in the security market, physical security market, people badge in and out of facilities. And we actually have an enterprise software platform and some other technologies that really enhance the experience of those particular security deployments. As Ian mentioned, we've got some pretty significant customers. We have been around for a while. We actually were founded in 2004. We had some very early M&A activity, almost a frenzy as a startup, to the point that we were rolled up into SAP globally, and we were 11 staff sitting here in Australia. We did some market research for 18 months while within SAP, and then managed to spin the company out after doing that market research. We spent pretty much a decade as a bootstrapped organization, just working with some very, very large customers. And ultimately we IPO'd the business, a small IPO here in Australia in 2017. And then subsequently we've got the listing on the OTC in the US just recently. As I said, we're mainly focused on enterprise software in the security space. And we have come from a pure research and development background. So to put it in perspective, we were only doing around 4 million Australian dollars, let's say $3 million US of revenue when we IPO'd the business, but we already had a number of the world's largest companies using our technology. We'd taken a strategy of just going after large corporates that really understood how we could improve their global environments. And we managed to do that successfully. And then subsequently, we've grown by fourfold in the last few years, which we'll get onto a little bit later. We have been experiencing growth of 40% compound growth over the last 5 years since listing. So we are moving quite successfully from that transition from research and development into a full commercial entity. And as you can see there, we've also got 8 of the top 100 companies using our technology today. You'll also see that we're sort of scattered across the world somewhat. Most of our research and development is based here in Australia, where I'm presenting from today. We pair that with a slightly lower cost base in Manila in the Philippines to do some of the software testing and some of the back office functions for our organization. And we have our headquarters in the US is based in Seattle to service our major customers in that particular location. And in the last couple of years, we've expanded into Europe, and we're actually in Belgium, and that's via a small acquisition that we've added in. Okay, so what's the market that we play in? So physical security, for those that aren't familiar with it, it's a very large industry. It's almost approaching $100 billion, and that's made up of bollards at the front gate that you can't drive through. It's made up of video that's watching everything. It's made up of electronic physical access control systems that allow you to badge in and out of buildings or facilities. It's a very large market. Within that large market, there's about $8 billion where they're selling new or extended physical access control systems. So again, they're the hardware-centric systems that are controlling your access to buildings. And what's actually happening is those systems have traditionally sat in their own silo, literally siloed away from the rest of the organization. And what's happened over the last 17 years since RightCrowd's been in business is those hardware-centric solutions started to come onto the IT networks, started to open up from an IP perspective. And companies such as ours were sitting there looking at it going, well, if you actually come into the IT domain and sit on top of the IT cables, we'll be able to start to interoperate and use additional data which stored in the organization to drive additional things within the physical security domain. And I'll get into some examples of what that looks like very soon. So it's an emerging market, but it's rapidly emerging and growing quite quickly. So these are the products that we focus on. You can see there on the left-hand side the types of industry segments that we typically work with. You know, banking and finance, manufacturing. We came out of mining in Australia originally, so in the industrial sector, pharmaceuticals, very large technology companies deploy this, logistics organizations, etc. So the main product, and what has traditionally been 100% of RightCrowd's revenue, has been our workforce platform. And you can see there it's a safety, security and compliance driven physical access controls for every type of worker on site. And we'll get into some examples of that, but just to put it in perspective, we have these very large hardware centric physical security systems. If we take an example of one of our large customers, they might be doing, you know, being 200 countries, they might have 900 buildings, they might have 500,000 people going in and out of those facilities every day. Or I might have a mining customer that has 55,000 people going on and off site every 12 hours across 11 mine sites. And every time someone comes into that organization, not only do you need to determine, do I have the right badge to get in, the right security badge, but really the organization is thinking more broadly than that, going, well, yes, they might have the correct badge to get in, but what else do I know about them that should determine whether you can get in and get out? And I'll talk about some examples of what else you need to know about a person in addition to the badge. So as I said, enterprise software platform has been 100% of our revenue up until about 18 months ago. And what we had done was moved into what we call the adjacent space of not only controlling access, and the point at which we can control access is when you badge through the door. But what we also want to extend to is, okay, you've got through the door, but I may not see you for another day until you actually, you know, you might exit at the end of the day, come back the next day and badge in again. But what about the 24 hours in between? Well, I need to control the presence of you in high secure areas. So we acquired a company called Tick2 out of Europe, and they're the leading entrant into a brand new market called security wearables. And this device here that I'm holding up actually takes a standard $1 security card, which you've all seen and used, and it slides in and turns it basically into a super smart active credential that is actually being worn by the actual person. You can see here my example actually sitting on a reel. Now, we'll talk about some use cases of actually wearing this particular device and how it actually helps in those security environments. We had zero revenue on that particular product. It was a brand new technology that we acquired into RightCrowd just before the pandemic. And of course, the pandemic has driven significant uptake of this device to the tune of 27,000 of them in the last 12 months from a zero base, and actually got us up to almost $5 million of revenue in the last 12 months for this particular device, because what we managed to do is not only do the base security things that it's designed to do, but we actually modified it to actually do contact tracing and social distancing for large enterprises. So if you're wearing one of these devices and you spend time with someone, it's actually recording how long you spend with that person and maybe on what particular floor that you were on when you met that person. And we can actually contact trace in real time across the organization, which is very valuable to those companies wanting to keep their people safe and continue to operate while they're in that environment. The third product I'll talk about is access analytics. So one of the things that we have found is that, you know, every potential customer desires to become more efficient. They like the workforce story and the platform that we deploy. But what we also find is there are a lot of customers that don't quite know where they are today. They don't know how to get started. So we built a product over the last 3 or 4 years. We're just launching it now, which can basically very quickly, like literally with under a week, identify some real vulnerabilities that we typically see within organizations, particularly with the insider threat and the physical security and how it relates and interoperates with some of the data that exists in your organization. It's a very visual tool, and it can quickly identify some of the things that you really need to start working on. So that's just moving into the market as we speak now. The last slide on the product is this one here. And it's just giving some examples of the types of things that we've done. So I'm going to mix the three products into this conversation. But as you can see, we're focused on the access and presence of the people and how it relates to the policies in the organization. The first image there you can see is optimizing and analytics. So as an example, we might be doing offboarding and onboarding. So we might have an organization that's doing 120,000 people that they're hiring overnight because they need to distribute goods all over the world. They need to move them into their fulfillment centers and logistics centers. And it will be the RightCrowd system internally that's actually managing the process of requesting access to those facilities for each of those new hires. It will be doing any amount of background checking and approval processes through our automated platform. And then ultimately, at the appropriate time, our system will direct the physical security system to actually accept these people because they've been approved, and we have the audit trail of how they got there. And more importantly, if you want to remove those people at the end of their contract dates, which we obviously know, it's our system that will actually remove those. It might be large-scale visitor management system, so it might be requesting access for our visitors, and we have customers literally doing millions of visitors per year through our platforms. Again, they're sitting disconnected from the physical security system, but at the end of the day, they do end up carrying a badge, and it's our systems that will often help them request those access, go through the approval processes, and provision those people into there. We might also be doing organizations that come in and go, well, we've been running our physical security system for 15 years. We've got 40,000 people in it, but we're not quite sure whether all 40,000 people have the exact physical access rights. Do they belong in those secure areas? How did they actually get there in the first place? Who actually approved that? And we have some technology that allows them to deploy our solutions and allows them to basically ask for audits or audit attestations where, let's say, Ian has 50 people coming into a data center. I could actually pass that form out to Ian. He goes and responds and says, yes, these 42 people belong by ticking yes, yes, yes. And the 8 people that don't belong, he says no and puts a reason in. And that way I can actually quickly identify across the organization the right people are approving it, and I can actually go and actually clean up the data that's sitting in my system. We might even be doing, processes around visitor check-ins. I forgot my badge. You think about a simple process. If I turn up to a large campus, might be 50,000 people on site. But of course, on a Monday morning, I've got to hire 20 people just to issue new badges for those people that just forgot them on a Monday morning, because you need them to operate within your business environment. So we can automate that. We can put in kiosks, and instead of actually having to line up with these 20 people serving you, I can actually get rid of those 20 people, have a kiosk there, which allows me to log on with my logical credentials. It knows that I'm Peter Hill, and then it says, what do you want? I say, I've forgotten my badge. And it says, okay, well, I'm going to turn your old badge off because I don't know where it is. And I'm going to provision you with a new badge, and it will actually dispense it out of the kiosk. So I can then walk out with a brand new badge just for the day. In the industrial sector, we might be doing things, as the example, 55,000 people coming into 11 mine sites. Now, when every single one of those people come into the mine site, I have to check not only whether they've got a valid badge, but do they have the right training and certifications to get onto an industrial facility, because I'm now dealing in safety and I've got to ensure I don't have people injured or killed on site. So do I have the right things stored in the learning management system about me that will allow me in? Do I have the right insurance policies for the contracting company that I work for? That information or data is stored way up in the ERP or SAP or Oracle system. And it's our system that'll be background checking that to determine, again, I'll pick on Ian. If Ian's a contractor, the contracting company that Ian works for, is it valid today? Does it have a valid insurance policy? And if it does, continue to allow Ian in. And if it doesn't, actually don't allow Ian in. And in fact, be a little more proactive. 7 days before it expires, notify Ian and all of his colleagues that within 7 days, if they don't renew their insurance policy details, then they will no longer be allowed on site. So again, I can go and rattle off hundreds of examples of why organizations use this technology at scale. They're essentially making their physical security systems smarter and making their organization, transitioning to digitization and automating a lot of the processes they need to support their business decisions. So we'll just move on to some highlights over the last 12 months. So just to also give you some additional information on our organization, our financial year runs from July to June. So we have just finished our financial year. As I said a few years ago, we IPO'd the business. We were only doing $4 million of revenue. We've grown that substantially to 15 million Australian dollars. More importantly, from our perspective, we've really been focusing on selling more of our annual subscription, software licenses and support. So that's our annual recurring revenue. And the previous year we did 4 million. We had a target of actually doubling it in the last year, which we managed to achieve. So we've moved to $8 million. You'll see there's a discrepancy of about $7 million in the sales revenue there from recurring to non-recurring. That's typically made up of some one-off license sales. So we still sell some licenses that come with a support and maintenance agreement, an annual one. And we also sell some of that hardware that I showed you as a one-off cost. And of course, we do some consulting, professional services to deploy some of those larger systems at scale. The second point is that we have recently raised some capital into our business, just over $10 million US. And that was really on the basis that we had succeeded in not only building our core product and successfully deploying it at a number of the largest companies in the world, but we had now got the presence control devices, security wearables, and we really thought that we could look at doubling our revenue over the next 2 years and getting very close to profitability within that time. So our investors backed that in the last few months, and we're now on that execution strategy of rounding out our business and growing it further into hitting that doubling of revenue. You can see our customers grew significantly in the last year. That is somewhat a result of the security wearables coming from a zero base. Obviously, they're much shorter sales cycles to get those devices out into the market. And we're also able to achieve that growth without actually increasing the cost much at all. You can see here just two highlights, a couple of graphs you can look at later, but you can see that our annual recurring revenue growing quite substantially. And important from our perspective, although we're based in Australia for our research facility, all our commercialization, or the majority of it, is overseas. 70% of it has been in the US for the last 3-4 years. We've really focused on that US market because that's where most of our likely customers are. And you can see there that EMEA, and particularly Europe, has been growing over the last year or two as well, as we've started to enter into that market. These particular slides are showing that our new products, obviously the dark green is the new products, or the security wearables devices that I showed you before. You can see there that it didn't exist before we sort of acquired the technology in 2019. We were just starting to commercialize as COVID hit, and we were a successful respondent to the COVID crisis, being able to pivot into that particular market space. It did impact our core business, but only impacted it as far as we actually sold more licenses and subscriptions, but we actually slowed down on the deployments because we actually had trouble actually getting to some of the deployments. Most of the deployments are done remotely, but some of the organizations we deal with are critical infrastructure, and they actually had to close off any non-critical people on site. And we had to actually extract our people. We also had a few projects that we were expecting to kick off that actually delayed 12 months just because the fact that everyone had gone home from the multinationals we deal with. And it wasn't until they started to come back that tap has started to turn on again. You can also see here that the hardware revenues and the recurring revenues, the licenses, are the areas of largest growth. You can see the darker greens growing substantially, and the lighter green is actually our consulting. Consulting will continue to grow. It actually went backwards in the last year because of those travel restrictions and delayed projects, but we expect that to continue to grow, but not at the same rate as the faster growing software space. few operational highlights. You need to know a little bit about RightCrowd to understand some of these, but some of them sort of are pretty self-explanatory. We're making some organizational changes to allow us to double that revenue or to support it over the next couple of years, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere. We've recently done the OTC listing that allows retail investors in the US to actually acquire the RightCrowd shares in US dollars, which has been very good for us. We've achieved some ISO compliance, particularly relating to obviously operating in the security space. Recently, we've announced we've been backed again by the Australian government, where they've basically provided $1 million grant that we have matched to educate another 16 university graduates, put them through a cyber program within the RightCrowd environment and enable them working with these large corporate customers. Access Analytics is the product that doesn't have the revenue at the moment. That is the product that we're launching at the moment. And we've recently been nominated for a security partnership, outstanding security partnership with one of our major clients, Microsoft, where we've been transforming the way that they sort of operate at scale in their physical security environment. So just the last slide here. So looking forward, so that's what we've done, a little bit about the history about the organization. Now I'm just going to talk a little bit about where we're heading, what our strategy is, how do we support that growth rate that we've got going. We have traditionally sold directly into the marketplace. About 85% of our revenue comes from direct sales. We do have some emerging partnerships with the large multinationals that really own these physical security systems, and they're typically companies such as Honeywell, Johnson Controls, Carrier, Siemens, Stanley Security, which is owned by Stanley Black & Decker. These are the companies that typically own the physical security space, and we have a complementary technology that really adds a lot of value to their literally hundreds of thousands of deployments out there. So we've been selling direct to date, but we do have some partnerships, particularly with the likes of Honeywell, where we're now starting to train up their sales organization internally, starting to identify the opportunities that we can partner with and going into the market, not just by ourselves. And of course, that creates significant leverage because it's not just us with a very small sales team trying to take on the world. It's actually going with the big multinational and going into many more organizations much quicker. To support that, we've actually made some pretty significant hires just in the last couple of days. We've been working on that since we raised our capital a few months ago. And that's really to bolster the experience of scaling our organization, particularly in the North American marketplace. And I will spend a minute talking about that. We're obviously continuing to invest in our research and development. That will never go away in RightCrowd. We came from a pure research and development background. It took us quite some time to develop that, working with these large customers that we had, proving these models out. And as we are now commercializing more broadly, we continue to see opportunities for improvements with our current technology and also adjacent spaces that we will continue to look at. P&L and profitability, we're obviously loss-making at the moment, heading towards profitability. We've reduced our loss quite significantly in the last 12 months. We're expecting over the next 2 years that not only do we double the revenue, but within that time, we're really aiming to get very close to that profitable mark. And really to support that, on our last slide, these are the 3 people that we've brought in. We've obviously got a very tight team. We've been together for quite some time, just over 150 people. But these 3 individuals bring some skills that we've really been looking to add into our business, particularly with some of the restrictions with travel at the moment, making it a little bit harder to move around the world than what we used to. The first one being Dave Oller, based in Silicon Valley. Basically, his background is 7 startups after working in IBM in sales. Not necessarily startups, but scale-ups in Silicon Valley that he's had over the last 20 years and been involved in running their sales and alliances. And he's joined RightCrowd recently to add to some of those success stories. He typically joins in organizations doing about $5 to $10 million US, which is where we're sitting at the over $10 million mark at the moment. And he's typically been there when they've been selling those organizations for between $30 and $50 million. One of them actually got to $100 million in revenue before the exit. Brian McIlvray coming in as Chief Operating Officer. He's actually based in Toronto, Canada. We have a lot of East Coast clients, and we believe that we can enhance our customer experience and our ability to deploy, improve the efficiencies around that. And he comes from a background in the risk management and incident management space. He actually built a software business. He was the CEO of that organization for quite some time. And they eventually sold it on. He's now joining us. And Brian Jones, really being our global CTO, coming in after 18 years of Honeywell. We've known Brian for the better part of a decade, and we've taken the opportunity to really bring our technologies together under Brian, who will be starting very soon. I might leave it there and open up to questions. The rest of it in the appendix you can read later if you want to get into the detail around the finances, but I hope that gives you some sort of insight into RightCrowd.
Thank you for the presentation. I would like to remind the listeners that if you have any questions, please click on the Q&A button and type in your question. The first question is, what is the range of sizes of facilities you target?
Traditionally we targeted very large ones, like we're talking, the Microsofts of the world. We've got two of the other big tech companies running our platform. We've got some of the mid-major banks and one of the top 10 banks in the US as well running this technology. Typically organizations that would have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. So these are global deployments, single instance sitting across their physical security systems. That being said, over the last year, we have been transitioning down market as we're starting to commercialize more broadly. And the smallest sites would be maybe a single building with a couple of thousand people coming in and out of it, maybe from a visitor management perspective. Or as we've moved into the security wearable space, we actually have organizations calling us and saying, hey, we've got 100 people in our facility. We've got a high-grade manufacturing plant that we can't afford to stop working. Can we actually buy 100 of these devices to actually manage the contact tracing within the organization? So you can see that we're broadening out our customer pyramid.
And what's across those different facility sizes, what would be the range of revenue you might see at the lower end and the high end?
Yeah, well, the lower end, you might be paying, for 1,000 for 100 of these badges. Maybe you're paying, $15,000, $20,000. So you might be starting at that range. Equally, for our enterprise software system, you might be starting at the $10,000 to $20,000 range for a facility controlling, 1,000 people. But at the top end, you might be doing, either a subscription license of $300,000, $400,000 or a one-off license at $600,000 or $700,000 US with a 20% support and maintenance fee on top of it. And then those organizations will typically enter into a consulting or professional services engagement to deploy it. And that will be at a similar level to the actual license fee or subscription fee. Some of those customers are so large that they continue to have people working with them from RightCrowd because they continue to find new areas to plug into this intelligence platform, and they just continue to improve their system on a yearly basis.
So when a company selects RightCrowd, would they deploy across all of their facilities simultaneously, or they do kind of one facility at a time, see how it goes?
Yeah, great question. So look, where we came from, we were dealing with these companies that they would start with a few just to prove it out because we were relatively unproven at that point, but they moved on to global deployments. That was the strategy from day one. We have other organizations that are now in our pipeline that do actually deploy maybe at a regional center, prove it out, and then start to move it out beyond that. We equally are able to now break up the technology. So it's not just the whole solution that does everything. We can actually go in and just pick, here's the two problems that you're wanting to solve. We'll license that particular technology in. Of course, once they're happy with that and getting that process going, they might come back and start talking to us about the other modules that they would like to add on. So there's a couple of different ways of slicing those particular opportunities up.
Does your system then only support your hardware, or does it support hardware from other companies?
No, that's the good thing. So it supports, we don't have the hardware other than security wearables, which is complementary to the security stack. The physical security stack is already in place. It's already owned by the Honeywells, by the Siemens, by the Johnson Controls. There are hundreds of thousands of those deployments out there in the market. And the intelligence layer in the ERP space is owned by SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, etc. We come in and broker those particular solutions. So we add the software layer in, it integrates into whatever hardware platform they've got. We support probably the top 70 to 80% of those platforms. And typically we will integrate directly into those straight out of the box because we're certified working with those security platforms. And then we'll start to bring in the intelligence from those upstream systems.
So one of our listeners asked about your relationship with Honeywell. And what they wanted to know is, did you mean ADI, which is a part of Honeywell, or some other area?
Yeah, Honeywell is very large. We work with actually three different areas of Honeywell. Honeywell have a security division, physical security division, sitting within their Honeywell Building Technologies group. They have a product in the market called ProWatch, which is the physical security system. They also have another one sitting elsewhere in the organization in the process control environment called Honeywell EBI, and we actually integrate and work with all of those parts of the Honeywell organization.
Can you talk a little bit more about how your relationship with Honeywell is evolving, how it might tie into revenue ramp at a sort of, highly granular level, or highly broad level, I meant to say?
Yeah, no problems at all. Good question. So we traditionally, when we pick off a new access control system, typically we're brought into some very large, complex environments, and that might take us a couple of years to actually win the customer, integrate the solution. It's the first one that we're doing in that particular domain space. And then typically at the same time, we'll be working with the vendor, let's say in this case, Honeywell, on showcasing how our integration works, getting certification for that product, and working with those clients. And then over that period of time, we will have been discussing how we actually extend that out to more of those customers in conjunction with the vendor. So we now have relationships with those with that particular vendor, and we're at the stage of training up salespeople and working through that process of taking it to market. These are large markets. They do take time. It's not, I don't ring a person tomorrow and actually make a sale. It's a process in the enterprise software space of getting out to the market, and but it will accelerate as we go forward.
Do you expect to sign additional partnerships sometimes in the future?
Yes, we do. As I said, we're supporting probably 70% of the market at the moment. That's probably the 8 or 9 major platforms, and we have not only opportunities to partner with the vendors, but the way most of the security industry works is it's actually security integrators, which are completely independent, who deploy these systems for the customers. And we have, emerging relationships with a number of those leading security integrators to take our products into the market as well.
Are you seeing evidence that TICTO customers today intend to continue using it when COVID subsides, if it subsides?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. Obviously, we pivoted into the COVID market, but the actual base use cases of this device are actually around security. Most of the customers that we have sold into to date have been focused on, yes, we're buying it for COVID, but we really like the fact that you're the device that can take an existing security card and actually turn it into something else. And this basically will allow you to determine whether you belong in a particular area of the organization. We're also currently extending it out with some of our customers to manage the evacuation process of facilities. So, if you're wearing one of these security wearables, as you exit the building under a fire alarm, you'll know whether that person's actually still remaining in the building or have actually cleared to a muster point. So again, you're starting to see those additional use cases. Obviously, we have a product roadmap on other use cases that will be added onto this device as well.
So how much of the 4.6 million in revenue from wearables was coming from existing RightCrowd customers versus customers that are new to RightCrowd? And how much of an opportunity is there to upsell the core product to those customers who first adopted wearables?
Yeah, to be honest, probably 90% is coming from brand new customers. It was a brand new market. We have calls coming in on a daily basis from around the world, searching for this type of technology. So we've obviously been responding to that. Many of our larger customers are still in the circumstances of trying to determine how they're going to actually return to the workplace. So haven't had probably the same drivers as some of the companies that have had to operate while on site throughout the COVID pandemic.
Well, thank you, Peter, for your time. Appreciate the presentation.
Thanks very much, Ian. Thanks everyone for listening.